Welcome back to our channel, where we uncover the most incredible true stories that will change how you see the world. Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan McDermott had devoted 47 years of her life to fighting cancer, but she never expected the enemy to be growing silently inside her own body. At 71, she was still one of Harvard Medical School's most respected oncologists, still seeing patients 3 days a week, still reviewing research papers late into the night in her Cambridge office overlooking the Charles River. She had dedicated her entire career to extending other people's lives, never imagining that her own time might be running out. It was a routine Tuesday morning in October when Bridget decided to run her own scans, something she did annually as part of her commitment to early detection advocacy. She had been feeling unusually fatigued lately, experiencing occasional abdominal discomfort that she attributed to too many hospital cafeteria meals and not enough sleep. As head of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute's Pancreatic Cancer Research Division, she knew the statistics better than anyone. Pancreatic cancer was still one of the most lethal forms of the disease, with a 5-year survival rate that hadn't improved significantly in decades despite all their research advances. The MRI images appeared on her screen with the clarity that modern medical technology provided, but what she saw made her hands freeze over the keyboard. There, unmistakable in its density and irregular borders, was a mass in her pancreas measuring approximately 6 centimeters by 4 centimeters. The radiological characteristics were textbook perfect for adenocarcinoma, and given its size, it was clearly advanced. Bridget stared at the images for 20 minutes, her medical training automatically cataloging the implications, while her human heart struggled to process the reality. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe 8 if she was lucky, and responded well to treatment. She had delivered this same diagnosis to hundreds of patients over the decades, had held their hands, and explained the treatment options with compassionate professionalism. Now she was on the other side of that conversation, and the irony was almost unbearable. She ran the scans again, hoping for a technical error, then had them reviewed by 2 other radiologists without revealing they were her own images. The diagnosis was confirmed. Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan McDermott, who had spent nearly half a century studying, treating, and researching cancer, was now its latest victim. That evening, sitting alone in her Beacon Hill townhouse with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands, Bridget found herself thinking about her grandmother Siobhan O'Connell for the first time in years. Siobhan had died when Bridget was 16, but even now, 55 years later, she could hear the old woman's voice singing in Irish Gaelic, telling stories about the old country that young Bridget had dismissed as folklore and superstition. Siobhan had been a woman of 2 worlds, fluent in both English and Irish, comfortable with both Catholic prayers and what she called the older ways of her ancestors. She had grown up in County Galway in the early 1900s, the daughter of a family that traced its lineage back to the ancient Celtic kingdoms. When she emigrated to Boston in 1925, she brought with her not just a suitcase of belongings, but a head full of stories about healers and druids, sacred wells and standing stones, ancient knowledge that could cure any illness if you knew how to ask for it properly. The O'Connells were always healers, Siobhan used to tell young Bridget as she braided the girl's red hair. Back in Ireland, people would come from 3 counties away when someone in our family laid hands on the sick. We carried the old knowledge, passed down from mother to daughter for 1,000 years. But the world changed, and the knowledge had to be hidden away until it was safe to remember again. Bridget had loved her grandmother's stories as a child, but as she grew older and more scientifically minded, she had learned to smile politely and change the subject. When she decided to study medicine, Siobhan had been supportive but had also issued a gentle warning. "Don't let your book learning make you forget what you carry in your blood, child. There are ways of healing that your professors will never teach you because they've forgotten how to see beyond their instruments." Now, facing her own mortality, Bridget found herself wondering what her grandmother would have said about modern medicine's limitations, about the gap between what they could diagnose and what they could actually cure. She walked to her study and pulled out the old wooden chest that had been Siobhan's, filled with letters, photographs, and documents that Bridget had never bothered to examine closely. Among the yellowed papers, she found something that stopped her cold. It was a family tree, hand-drawn in Siobhan's careful script, tracing the O'Connell lineage back through centuries of Irish history. But this wasn't just any family tree. The names and dates indicated connections to the royal houses of medieval Ireland, to the ancient Celtic kingdoms that had ruled the island before the Norman invasions. At the bottom of the family tree, Siobhan had written a note in Irish Gaelic. Bridget's Irish was rusty from disuse, but she could make out enough words to understand the general meaning. The blood of the healers runs true. When the time comes, the ancient knowledge will awaken in the one who needs it most. Attached to the family tree was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before Siobhan's death, addressed to my granddaughter Bridget, to be opened when she faces the darkness. Bridget's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Bridget," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means the cancer has found you, as I always knew it would. Don't be frightened by my knowing this. Our family has always had the sight, the ability to see patterns that others miss. I saw your future when you were just a baby, saw the path your life would take, the great work you would do, and the greater work that would come after." The letter went on to explain that the O'Connell family had been guardians of an ancient Celtic healing text for over 800 years, a book called the Líbhar na Sláinte, or Book of Healers, that contained knowledge about treating illnesses that modern medicine considered incurable. The book had been hidden in Ireland during the English conquests and the religious persecutions, protected by a network of families who understood its value. "The book is still there," Siobhan's letter continued, "hidden in the ruins of Clonfert Abbey in County Galway, waiting for someone with both the ancient blood and the modern knowledge to claim it. But it will only reveal itself to someone who approaches it with both scientific understanding and spiritual humility, someone who has learned that healing is more than chemistry and surgery." Bridget read the letter 3 times, her rational mind fighting against what felt like fantasy, while her heart recognized something that resonated at a deeper level. According to Siobhan, there was a man named Padraig Mac Cullough, descended from another hereditary healing family, who served as a guardian of the ancient knowledge. He would be in his 50s now, living somewhere near Galway, and he would help her find what she was looking for if she could convince him that she was ready to learn. The next morning, Bridget called her office and arranged for an immediate leave of absence, telling her colleagues she needed time to process her diagnosis and explore treatment options. It wasn't entirely a lie. She booked a flight to Dublin, packed a single suitcase, and left Cambridge without telling anyone where she was going or why. The flight to Ireland gave her 8 hours to think about what she was doing. From a scientific perspective, it was completely irrational to travel to another country chasing family legends when she should be starting chemotherapy immediately. Every day of delay reduced her already slim chances of survival. But something deeper than rational thought was driving her, a sense that conventional treatment would only buy her a few months of suffering, without offering any real hope of recovery. She had treated too many pancreatic cancer patients to harbor any illusions about the effectiveness of standard protocols. Surgery wasn't an option given the size and location of her tumor. Chemotherapy might shrink it temporarily, but the cancer would inevitably return more aggressively than before. Radiation could help with pain management, but wouldn't extend her life significantly. In her honest medical opinion, she had 6 months to live regardless of what treatment she chose. Dublin Airport was gray and drizzling when she landed, but Bridget felt an unexpected sense of homecoming as she heard Irish accents around her and saw the green landscapes beyond the terminal windows. She rented a car and drove west toward Galway, following roads that seemed familiar despite the fact that she had never been to Ireland before. The countryside was more beautiful than she had imagined from her grandmother's stories. Ancient stone walls divided fields where sheep grazed contentedly, and every few miles she passed ruins of castles or abbeys that spoke of a history far older and more complex than anything in America. The October light had a quality she had never experienced, simultaneously gentle and penetrating, making even ordinary landscapes look touched by magic. She found a bed and breakfast in Galway City and spent her first evening walking through the narrow medieval streets, listening to traditional music spilling from pub doorways and watching the river Corrib flow toward Galway Bay. For the first time since receiving her diagnosis, she felt something other than fear and despair. There was hope here, or at least the possibility of hope, carried on the wind that blew in from the Atlantic. The next morning, Bridget began her search for Padraig MacCulloch. She started with the local telephone directory, then moved on to asking at shops and pubs around the city. No one seemed to know anyone by that name, but several people mentioned that there were still families in the rural areas who practiced traditional healing, people who worked with herbs and laying on of hands, carrying on knowledge that predated modern medicine by centuries. It was an elderly woman at a farmer's market who finally pointed her in the right direction. MacCulloch, you say? There's a family by that name out near Clonfert, though they keep to themselves mostly. The locals call him Padraig and Leah's, Padraig the healer. People still go to him when the doctors can't help them anymore, though he's particular about who he'll see. Clonfert was a tiny village about 30 miles east of Galway, dominated by the ruins of an ancient abbey that had been one of Ireland's most important monastic sites in medieval times. Saint Brendan the Navigator had founded the abbey in the 6th century, and it had been a center of learning and healing for nearly 1,000 years before English soldiers destroyed it during the Reformation. Bridget found the MacCulloch cottage at the end of a narrow lane that wound through fields dotted with ancient standing stones. The house was old but well-maintained, with a thatched roof and walls covered in climbing roses that were still blooming despite the late season. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could see vegetable gardens and herb beds that spoke of someone who lived close to the land. She knocked on the wooden door, her heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. After a few moments, the door opened to reveal a man who appeared to be in his late 50s, tall and lean with graying brown hair and eyes the color of the Irish Sea. He studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan MacDermott," he said, his voice carrying the musical cadence of rural Ireland. "I've been expecting you." Bridget felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. "Expecting me? But how could you possibly?" Padraig smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warm and welcoming. "Come in out of the cold, and I'll explain what I can. Your grandmother, Siobhan, sent word that you would be coming, though it took you longer to get here than she thought it would." Bridget followed him into a cottage that felt like stepping back in time. The rooms were lit by oil lamps and candles, furnished with handmade wooden furniture and woven textiles in traditional Celtic patterns. The air smelled of peat fire and herbs, and every surface seemed to hold books, botanical specimens, or objects she couldn't immediately identify, but that seemed to pulse with significance. "Siobhan sent word?" Bridget asked, settling into a chair by the fireplace. "But she died 55 years ago." "Did she?" Padraig asked, raising an eyebrow as he poured tea from a pot that had been steeping by the fire. "Death isn't quite the barrier to communication that modern people believe it to be. Those of us who carry the old blood learn to listen for voices that others can't hear." Bridget accepted the tea, noting that it had a complex herbal flavor unlike anything she had tasted before. Almost immediately, she felt more alert and focused, as if the fog of fatigue that had been clouding her mind for months was beginning to lift. "I know why you're here," Padraig continued, settling into the chair across from her. "You're carrying the cancer, and the modern doctors have told you there's nothing they can do. You've come looking for the Líbhar na Slánate, the healing book that your family has been protecting for 8 centuries. "You know about the book?" Bridget asked. "My family has been its guardians for just as long as yours," Padraig replied. "The MacCullochs and the O'Connells have been working together to preserve the ancient knowledge since the time of the Norman invasions. We've been waiting for someone like you, someone with both the bloodline and the modern training to understand what the book really contains." Padraig went on to explain that the Líbhar na Slánate wasn't just a collection of herbal remedies or folk cures. It was a comprehensive manual of Celtic healing that integrated physical, mental, and spiritual approaches to illness in ways that modern medicine was only beginning to understand. The book contained knowledge about how consciousness itself could be used as a healing tool, how the body's own intelligence could be activated to repair damage that seemed irreversible, how the healing energy of the earth itself could be channeled through human intention. But the book is protected by more than just its hiding place, Padraig warned. It will only reveal its contents to someone who approaches it with the right combination of scientific knowledge and spiritual humility. Many people have tried to find it over the centuries, but it remains invisible to those who would use its knowledge for personal gain or who lack the wisdom to apply it responsibly. That evening, Padraig took Bridget to meet other members of what he called the Circle, descendants of ancient Celtic healing families who had kept the traditional knowledge alive through centuries of suppression and persecution. They gathered in a grove of oak trees behind Clonfert Abbey, where standing stones marked a sacred space that had been used for healing ceremonies for over 2,000 years. Among the circle was a 14-year-old girl named Aisling Murphy, whose family had been seers and prophets for the Celtic kings. When Aisling looked at Bridget, her young face became serious and ancient at the same time. "I've been dreaming about you, grandmother Bridget," Aisling said, using the traditional Irish term of respect for an elder. "In my dreams, I saw you coming across the water, carrying both sickness and the seed of its own cure. The ancestors have been whispering about you for months, saying that the time of the Great Awakening is finally at hand." Bridget felt tears welling up in her eyes, though she couldn't quite say why. The combination of the sacred setting, the warm acceptance of these strangers who treated her like family, and the growing sense that she had found something she didn't even know she had been looking for created an emotional response that overwhelmed her usual scientific detachment. "What do you mean by the Great Awakening?" she asked. Aisling closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to voices that others couldn't hear. "The prophecies speak of a time when the ancient healing knowledge would return to the world, when the children of the Celtic peoples scattered across the earth would remember their heritage and use it to heal the sickness of modern times. You're one of the keys to that awakening, grandmother Bridget. Your training in modern medicine makes you the perfect bridge between the old knowledge and the new world." Over the following days, Padraig began preparing Bridget for the ritual that would allow her to access the Liebhar na Slanate. The preparation involved fasting, meditation, and learning to work with plant medicines that could expand consciousness and open awareness to dimensions of reality that normal perception couldn't access. "The book exists in multiple realms simultaneously," Padraig explained, as he guided Bridget through breathing exercises designed to quiet her analytical mind. "On the physical level, it's hidden in a chamber beneath the abbey ruins. But it's also protected by what we call the veil, a barrier of consciousness that prevents it from being found by those who aren't ready to understand its contents." Bridget found the preparatory practices both challenging and surprisingly natural. Despite her scientific training, she had always been drawn to meditation and contemplative practices, though she had never explored them deeply. Now, as she learned to quiet her mind and open her awareness, she began to experience states of consciousness that revealed entirely new ways of understanding health and illness. During one particularly deep meditation, she found herself experiencing her cancer not as an enemy to be fought, but as a confused aspect of her own life force that had forgotten its proper function. Instead of feeling like a victim of random cellular malfunction, she began to sense the tumor as part of a larger pattern that included not just her physical body, but her emotional state, her life choices, and her relationship to the world around her. "Cancer isn't just a biological process," Padraig explained when she described this insight to him. "It's often a manifestation of spiritual and emotional imbalances that have been allowed to develop over time. The ancient healers understood that you can't treat the body without also treating the spirit, and you can't heal an individual without also considering their connection to their community and their environment." After a week of preparation, Padraig declared that Bridget was ready for the ceremony that would allow her to access the healing book. The ritual would take place during the new moon, when the veil between the worlds was thinnest and the ancient protective barriers were most permeable. The ceremony began at sunset on a cold October evening. Bridget, Padraig, Aisling, and 3 other members of the circle gathered in the grove behind Clonfert Abbey, where they had built a fire from oak wood cut according to traditional protocols. The flames cast dancing shadows on the ancient standing stones, creating an atmosphere that felt both timeless and intensely present. Aisling led Bridget through a series of invocations in Irish Gaelic, calling upon the spirits of the ancestors and the guardians of the sacred knowledge to grant access to the healing wisdom. As the words washed over her, Bridget felt her ordinary sense of identity beginning to shift and expand. She was no longer just Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan Dermot, Harvard oncologist. She was also Bridget of the O'Connells, daughter of a lineage that stretched back through centuries of healers and wisdom keepers. Padraig offered her a cup containing a tea made from plants that had been growing in the sacred grove for hundreds of years. The liquid had a bitter, earthy taste that seemed to carry the essence of the forest itself. Within minutes of drinking it, Bridget felt her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual awareness. The stones around the grove began to glow with a soft inner light, and she could see threads of energy connecting all the living things in the sacred space. She could feel the presence of countless generations of healers who had gathered in this same grove, their knowledge and intention still alive in the very atoms of the place. Aisling took her hand and led her toward the abbey ruins, which appeared completely different in her expanded state of consciousness. Instead of crumbling walls and broken stones, Bridget could see the abbey as it had been in its prime, filled with light and inhabited by monks who moved with purpose and reverence through their daily routines. "The entrance to the chamber is here," Aisling said, stopping before what appeared to be a solid stone wall. "But you have to see with more than your eyes to find it." Bridget placed her hands on the stone and immediately felt a warmth that seemed to come from deep within the earth. As she focused her intention on finding the hidden entrance, the stones began to shift and reorganize themselves, revealing a narrow passage that led down into the earth beneath the abbey. The passage was lit by a phosphorescent glow that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. As they descended, Bridget could hear the sound of underground water and feel the presence of something ancient and powerful waiting in the depths below. The chamber they entered was circular, carved from living rock and filled with a light that had no visible source. Stone shelves lined the walls, holding dozens of books and scrolls that appeared to be in perfect condition despite their obvious age. But Bridget's attention was immediately drawn to a single volume that rested on a stone pedestal in the center of the room. The Libhar na Slanate was bound in leather that seemed to shift between brown and green depending on the angle of view. Celtic knot patterns were carved into the cover, and when Bridget approached it, the design seemed to move and flow like living vines. The book was warm to the touch, and as she opened the cover, golden light spilled from the pages, filling the chamber with radiance. But what shocked Bridget most was that the pages weren't filled with ancient Irish text, as she had expected. Instead, the words appeared in whatever language she needed to understand them. When she focused on a passage about cellular regeneration, the text appeared in medical terminology that was familiar from her decades of cancer research. When she turned to a section about the spiritual causes of illness, the words appeared in language that spoke directly to her heart and intuition. The book seemed to be alive, responding to her questions and presenting information in exactly the way she needed to receive it. As she read, Bridget began to understand that the healing knowledge contained in the Libhar na Slanate wasn't separate from modern medicine. It was the missing piece that could make contemporary treatments infinitely more effective. The book explained how consciousness could be directed to activate the body's own healing intelligence, how specific meditation techniques could stimulate immune responses that conventional medicine couldn't achieve, how the electromagnetic fields generated by focused intention could influence cellular behavior at the quantum level. Most remarkably, it provided detailed protocols for integrating these consciousness-based approaches with standard medical treatments in ways that amplified the effectiveness of both. Bridget spent hours in the chamber, absorbing knowledge that seemed to rewrite everything she thought she understood about healing and disease. The book showed her how her own cancer could be approached not just as a malignant growth to be destroyed, but as a teacher that could guide her toward a more complete understanding of health and wholeness. As dawn broke above the abbey ruins, Bridget emerged from the underground chamber fundamentally changed. The knowledge she had absorbed felt like it was rewiring her brain, creating new neural pathways that connected her scientific training with forms of understanding that went far beyond rational analysis. Over the following days, working with Padraig and the other members of the circle, Bridget began applying the healing protocols described in the Liebhar Naslanate to her own condition. The treatments involved a combination of traditional herbal medicines, energy healing techniques, and consciousness practices that seemed to work at levels deeper than anything she had encountered in conventional medicine. The results were immediately apparent. Within a week, her energy levels had improved dramatically. The abdominal pain that had been her constant companion began to fade. Most remarkably, when she had new scans done at a hospital in Dublin, the radiologist was confused by what the images showed. "Dr. McDermott," the radiologist said, comparing her new scans to the ones she had brought from Boston. "Are you certain these are both your images? The mass we see in the recent scan appears to be significantly smaller than what's shown in the earlier films, and the tissue characteristics have changed dramatically." Bridget looked at the scans with the trained eye of someone who had interpreted thousands of similar images over her career. The tumor that had measured 6 by 4 centimeters just 3 weeks earlier now appeared to be less than half that size, and instead of the irregular, aggressive-looking borders typical of advanced pancreatic cancer, the mass now had well-defined edges that suggested it was becoming encapsulated and potentially resectable. "I've been pursuing some alternative treatments," Bridget told the radiologist, not wanting to explain the full complexity of what she had experienced. "It appears they may be having some effect." When she returned to Clonfert with the scan results, Padraig and the others greeted the news with satisfaction but not surprise. "The healing has begun," Aisling said simply, "but this is just the first step. The real work starts now." "What do you mean?" Bridget asked. "The knowledge you've gained isn't meant just for your own healing," Padraig explained. "You're being prepared to serve as a bridge between the ancient wisdom and the modern world. Your training in conventional medicine gives you the credibility to introduce these healing methods into contemporary medical practice in ways that will be taken seriously by your colleagues." Bridget spent another month in Ireland, deepening her understanding of the Celtic healing traditions and learning how to integrate them with conventional medical protocols. She studied with herbalists who could identify healing plants by their energy signatures, worked with energy healers who could see illness as patterns of disrupted life force, and learned from Aisling how to develop the intuitive abilities that were necessary for truly effective healing work. When she finally returned to Boston in December, Bridget was not the same person who had left 3 months earlier. Physically, she was stronger and healthier than she had been in years. Mentally, she carried knowledge that could revolutionize cancer treatment. Spiritually, she had reconnected with a heritage that gave her life a depth of meaning she had never experienced during her purely academic career. Her first stop after landing at Logan Airport was Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where she arranged for comprehensive scans to document the changes in her condition. The results were so dramatic that her colleagues initially suspected technical errors. The tumor that had been considered inoperable was now small enough for surgical removal, and the tissue characteristics suggested that it had become much less aggressive than typical pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Dr. James Harrison, her longtime colleague and the current head of the pancreatic cancer program, reviewed her scans with amazement. "Bridget, I've never seen anything like this. Spontaneous remissions in pancreatic cancer are virtually unheard of, and certainly not to this degree. What treatments have you been pursuing?" Bridget knew that her answer would determine whether her colleagues took her seriously or dismissed her as someone who had succumbed to desperation and wishful thinking. She chose her words carefully. "I've been working with traditional healing methods that originated in Ireland, where my family comes from. These approaches focus on treating cancer as a systemic imbalance rather than just a localized malignancy. I've been combining specific herbal protocols with meditation techniques that appear to activate immune responses and promote cellular repair." Dr. Harrison looked skeptical but intrigued. "Bridget, you know I have enormous respect for your scientific judgment. If you believe these alternative approaches have contributed to your improvement, I'm willing to listen. But we'll need to document everything carefully and see if we can develop protocols that other patients could benefit from. Over the following months, Bridget began the careful process of introducing Celtic healing methods into her practice at Dana-Farber. She started by documenting her own case in detail, publishing a paper in the Journal of Integrative Oncology that described the traditional healing approaches she had used and the dramatic improvements in her condition. The response from the medical community was mixed. Some colleagues were fascinated by the possibilities and eager to learn more about consciousness-based healing approaches. Others were skeptical about any treatment that couldn't be explained through conventional biochemical mechanisms. But the undeniable reality of Bridget's recovery gave her credibility that no amount of theoretical argument could have provided. Working with a small team of open-minded colleagues, Bridget began developing clinical protocols that integrated Celtic healing methods with standard cancer treatments. They started with patients who had exhausted conventional options and were facing terminal diagnoses, people who had nothing to lose by trying approaches that conventional medicine didn't recognize. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Patients who learned to work with consciousness-based healing techniques showed significantly better responses to chemotherapy and radiation. Their immune systems seemed to recover more quickly from the toxic effects of treatment, and they experienced fewer side effects and complications. Most remarkably, several patients achieved complete remissions in cases where conventional medicine had offered no hope. As word of these successes spread through the cancer community, Bridget found herself at the center of a growing movement to integrate traditional healing wisdom with modern medical practice. She was invited to speak at conferences around the world, to consult with other cancer centers about implementing consciousness-based healing programs, and to advise pharmaceutical companies about developing treatments that worked with the body's natural healing intelligence rather than against it. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of what Bridget came to think of as the global awakening. Patients who worked with the Celtic healing methods often reported spontaneous activation of healing abilities in themselves, and many discovered that they could help heal others through focused intention and energy work. Dr. Sarah Chen, an acupuncturist at Massachusetts General Hospital, contacted Bridget after several of her patients mentioned learning Celtic healing techniques. Dr. McDermott, I've been working with traditional Chinese medicine for 20 years, but what you're describing sounds remarkably similar to ancient Taoist healing methods that my grandmother practiced in China. I'm wondering if there might be connections between Celtic healing traditions and other ancient medical systems. This conversation led to the discovery that traditional healing methods around the world shared common principles that had been preserved in different cultures, but were fundamentally part of a unified understanding of how consciousness and healing were related. Indigenous healers from North America, traditional medicine practitioners from Africa, Aboriginal healers from Australia, and shamans from South America all reported that they were experiencing similar awakenings to ancient knowledge that had been dormant for generations. Bridget found herself coordinating with healers and medical professionals around the world who were working to revive and integrate traditional healing wisdom with contemporary medical practice. The Celtic Healing Center she established in collaboration with Padraig and Ashling became part of an international network of facilities where people could learn consciousness-based healing methods that complemented rather than replaced conventional medical care. 3 years after her original diagnosis, Bridget was not only cancer-free, but had become one of the world's leading advocates for integrative approaches to healing that honored both ancient wisdom and modern science. Her book, The Celtic Path to Healing, Integrating Ancient Wisdom with Modern Medicine, became an international bestseller and helped establish consciousness-based healing as a legitimate field of medical research. Standing in her office at Dana-Farber on a spring morning, looking out at the Charles River, where she had sat 3 years earlier facing what she thought was a death sentence, Bridget reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The cancer that had seemed like her greatest enemy had become her greatest teacher, leading her to discover not just her Celtic heritage, but her true calling as a healer who could bridge ancient and modern approaches to medicine. At 74, she was healthier, more energetic, and more purposeful than she had been in decades. The work she was doing felt infinitely more meaningful than her previous research, because it was helping people not just survive their illnesses, but transform them into opportunities for growth and awakening. A knock on her office door interrupted her reverie. Aisling Murphy, now 17 and studying to become a doctor herself, entered carrying a stack of research papers. "Grandmother Bridget," Aisling said with the warm smile that always lit up her young face, "the latest clinical trial results are in. The patients who used Celtic healing methods along with their conventional treatments showed a 70% improvement in 5-year survival rates compared to the control group." Bridget felt tears of gratitude welling up in her eyes. The ancient knowledge that her grandmother Siobhan had protected through decades of exile was now helping save lives around the world. The healing wisdom of the Celtic people, preserved through centuries of persecution and suppression, was finally returning to serve humanity's greatest need. "The ancestors would be proud," Aisling continued, settling into the chair across from Bridget's desk. "But they want you to know that this is still just the beginning. The real healing work starts now, as more people around the world remember what their own traditions have to offer." Bridget nodded, feeling both the weight and the joy of the work that lay ahead. At 74, she had found her true calling as a healer, teacher, and bridge between worlds. The knowledge contained in the Liebhar na Slanate had saved her life, but more importantly, it had shown her how to help save countless other lives by teaching people to work with the healing intelligence that existed within their own consciousness. The cancer that had brought her to Ireland in desperation had become the doorway to discovering her authentic purpose. The grandmother who had died when Bridget was 16 had reached across time to guide her granddaughter to the healing wisdom that would define the rest of her life. And the ancient Celtic knowledge that had been hidden for centuries was now emerging to offer hope to a world that desperately needed to remember how to heal both individuals and the larger community of all life. But even as the success of the Celtic healing program grew, Bridget found herself facing new challenges that would test everything she had learned about bridging ancient wisdom with modern institutions. The pharmaceutical industry, which stood to lose billions if consciousness-based healing methods became widely accepted, began mobilizing resources to discredit her work. Dr. Marcus Wellington, a prominent oncologist from Johns Hopkins who had built his career on conventional cancer protocols, published a scathing editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine questioning the scientific validity of Bridget's approach. "While we all sympathize with Dr. Mac Dermot's personal struggle with cancer," Wellington wrote, "we cannot allow desperation and wishful thinking to masquerade as legitimate medical research. These so-called Celtic healing methods lack any theoretical foundation in established biochemistry and represent a dangerous departure from evidence-based medicine." The attack stung, but it also galvanized support from an unexpected quarter. Dr. Rachel Thompson, a young oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering who had been quietly studying the consciousness-healing connection, published a response that detailed the growing body of research supporting mind-body approaches to cancer treatment. "Dr. Mac Dermot's work represents the kind of innovative thinking that medicine desperately needs," Thompson wrote. "Rather than dismissing approaches that challenge our current paradigms, we should be rigorously studying them to understand how they might enhance our therapeutic arsenal." The controversy attracted international attention, leading to invitations for Bridget to present her findings at medical conferences around the world. At a symposium in London on integrative oncology, she found herself sharing the stage with Dr. Kenji Nakamura, a Japanese physician who had been documenting similar phenomena in his work with traditional healing methods in rural Japan. "Dr. Mac Dermot," Dr. Nakamura said during a break between sessions, "what you describe about Celtic healing methods aligns remarkably with what I've observed in Japanese traditional medicine. My grandmother was a traditional healer who worked with energy meridians and consciousness techniques that modern medicine dismissed as superstition. But when I began incorporating her methods into my cancer practice, I saw results that conventional treatment alone could never achieve. This conversation led to the formation of what would become known as the Global Traditional Healing Research Consortium, an international network of medical professionals who were documenting the effectiveness of consciousness-based healing methods within their own cultural traditions. Dr. Alina Santos from Brazil contributed research on Amazon plant medicine approaches to cancer treatment. Dr. Amara Akafor from Nigeria shared data on traditional African healing ceremonies that seemed to activate immune responses beyond anything conventional medicine could explain. Dr. Sarah Crowfeather from the Pine Ridge Reservation documented Native American healing practices that had achieved remarkable success rates with conditions mainstream medicine considered incurable. As the consortium grew, patterns began to emerge that suggested all traditional healing systems shared common principles about the relationship between consciousness, community, and health. These ancient medical traditions understood illness not as random biological malfunction, but as symptoms of deeper imbalances that affected individuals, families, and entire communities simultaneously. What we're discovering, Bridget explained to a packed auditorium at the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva, is that traditional healing systems around the world developed sophisticated understanding of how consciousness itself functions as a therapeutic agent. Modern medicine has focused intensively on biochemical mechanisms while largely ignoring the role of awareness, intention, and community connection in healing processes. The WHO presentation marked a turning point in the acceptance of consciousness-based healing within mainstream medical institutions. Dr. Priya Sharma, the Director General of WHO, announced the formation of a new initiative to study traditional healing methods and develop protocols for integrating them with conventional medical care in ways that respected both cultural authenticity and scientific rigor. But the real breakthrough came when Bridget received an unexpected visitor at her office in Boston. Dr. James McKenna, the chief of oncology at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, had flown to Massachusetts specifically to discuss a proposal that would change the landscape of cancer treatment in America. Dr. McDermott, McKenna said, settling into the chair across from her desk, I'll be direct with you. I've been skeptical about alternative healing approaches for my entire career, but we've been quietly tracking the outcomes of cancer patients who have participated in your Celtic healing program, comparing them to similar patients who received only conventional treatment. The differences are so significant that we can no longer ignore them. McKenna went on to explain that MD Anderson wanted to establish the first major cancer center program that fully integrated traditional healing methods with cutting-edge medical technology. They were prepared to offer Bridget a position as Director of Integrative Healing, with resources to establish a comprehensive program that would serve as a model for other institutions around the world. This would mean leaving Harvard, McKenna acknowledged, but it would also mean having the resources to demonstrate that consciousness-based healing isn't alternative medicine, it's the future of medicine. The decision to accept the position at MD Anderson was difficult, but Bridget recognized it as an opportunity to establish Celtic healing methods within one of the world's most prestigious cancer centers. The move to Houston also allowed her to work more closely with the growing network of traditional healers who were traveling from Ireland to support the expansion of the program. Padraig MacCullough arrived in Texas 6 months after Bridget took her new position, bringing with him 3 other Celtic healers who carried specialized knowledge about different aspects of the traditional healing arts. Aisling Murphy, now 19 and in her second year of medical school at University College Dublin, also joined the team as part of an international exchange program that would allow her to complete her clinical training while working with both traditional and modern healing methods. The MD Anderson Celtic Healing Center became a pilgrimage destination for cancer patients from around the world who had exhausted conventional treatment options. But unlike alternative medicine clinics that rejected mainstream medical care, the Celtic Center was fully integrated with the hospital's oncology services. Patients received state-of-the-art chemotherapy, radiation, and surgical treatments alongside consciousness-based healing work that enhanced their body's responses to conventional therapy. The results were consistently remarkable. 5-year survival rates for patients who participated in the integrated program exceeded national averages by 40 to 60%, depending on cancer type and stage. More importantly, patients reported dramatically improved quality of life during treatment, with reduced side effects, faster recovery times, and greater psychological resilience in facing their diagnoses. Dr. Lisa Wang, a medical anthropologist from University of California, San Francisco, conducted a 3-year study of the MD Anderson program that documented not just clinical outcomes, but the social and cultural dimensions of healing that conventional medicine typically ignored. What's happening at MD Anderson challenges fundamental assumptions about how healing works, Wang concluded in her published research. Patients aren't just receiving medical treatments, they're being initiated into a community of healing that transforms their entire relationship to illness and health. The success of the program attracted attention from pharmaceutical companies, but not the kind of opposition Bridget had expected. Dr. Catherine Mueller, vice president of research at one of the world's largest drug companies, scheduled a meeting with Bridget that revealed an unexpected openness to integrating consciousness-based approaches with pharmaceutical development. Dr. McDermott, Mueller explained, our research indicates that patients who practice meditation and consciousness-based healing methods show significantly better responses to our cancer drugs. Instead of seeing traditional healing as competition, we're interested in understanding how these approaches might enhance the effectiveness of our medications. This conversation led to the first clinical trials that systematically studied how Celtic healing methods could be combined with pharmaceutical treatments to achieve better outcomes than either approach could accomplish alone. The research demonstrated that patients who learned consciousness-based healing techniques required lower doses of chemotherapy drugs to achieve the same therapeutic effects, while experiencing fewer side effects and maintaining better overall health throughout their treatment. As word of these successes spread through the medical community, Bridget found herself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond cancer treatment. Medical schools began requesting her consultation on developing curricula that would prepare future doctors to work with consciousness-based healing methods. Nursing programs wanted to train their students in energy healing techniques that could enhance patient care. Even medical device companies began exploring how traditional healing principles might inform the development of new therapeutic technologies. The transformation wasn't limited to medical institutions. Bridget began receiving invitations from corporations, universities, and government agencies that wanted to understand how the principles of traditional healing might be applied to organizational health, educational effectiveness, and community resilience. What you've discovered about healing individuals seems to have applications for healing communities and organizations as well. Dr. Margaret Stevens, a systems theorist from MIT, explained during a consultation about corporate wellness programs. The Celtic understanding of illness as community imbalance rather than individual pathology suggests new approaches to addressing social problems like workplace stress, educational dysfunction, and community fragmentation. This insight led to the development of what Bridget called community healing protocols, applications of Celtic healing principles to larger social systems. Companies that implemented these approaches reported significant improvements in employee satisfaction, productivity, and overall organizational health. Schools that incorporated traditional healing concepts into their educational models saw improvements in student academic performance, emotional well-being, and social cohesion. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of what researchers began calling hereditary healing activation. People who participated in Celtic healing programs frequently discovered that they possessed natural healing abilities that seemed to be connected to their own genetic heritage. DNA testing revealed that many of these individuals carried genetic markers indicating descent from traditional healing lineages, suggesting that healing abilities might be literally inherited through bloodlines that had been dormant for generations. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a geneticist at Stanford who had been studying this phenomenon, presented findings that challenged conventional understanding of how genetic information is expressed. What we're seeing suggests that exposure to traditional healing environments can activate dormant genetic programming related to healing abilities, Chen explained. It's as if the DNA contains instructions for healing capabilities that require specific environmental triggers to become active. This discovery led to the establishment of genetic counseling programs that could help people identify whether they carried hereditary healing potential and guide them toward appropriate training if they chose to develop these abilities. Families began discovering healing lineages that had been forgotten for generations, reconnecting with traditional knowledge that their ancestors had preserved through centuries of cultural suppression. Aisling Murphy, now 21 and completing her medical training, had become one of the most gifted young healers anyone had encountered. Her ability to diagnose illness through intuitive perception often proved more accurate than conventional medical testing, and her healing treatments consistently produced results that seemed to transcend the boundaries of what medicine considered possible. "Grandmother Bridget," Aisling said during one of their regular consultations about complex cases, "I've been having dreams about the next phase of this work. The ancestors are showing me visions of healing centers established around the world, each one adapted to the traditional knowledge of its local indigenous culture, but all connected in a global network of consciousness-based healing. What do you see in these dreams?" Bridget asked. "I see medical schools teaching traditional healing alongside conventional medicine as if they were always meant to be integrated. I see hospitals with healing gardens where patients work with plant medicines and energy healers as a normal part of their treatment. I see families learning to heal themselves and each other using knowledge that their great-grandparents carried, but that was forgotten until now." Aisling's visions were proving prophetic. Medical institutions around the world were beginning to establish programs that integrated traditional healing methods with conventional care. The University of Edinburgh announced plans for the first European Center for Celtic Healing Studies. The University of Tokyo established a traditional Japanese healing research institute. Aboriginal healing centers were being developed in partnership with medical schools across Australia. Most remarkably, the Vatican announced that it was convening an international conference on spiritual dimensions of healing, bringing together traditional healers from around the world with medical researchers and religious leaders to explore how consciousness-based healing might be understood within different faith traditions. 5 years after her original diagnosis, Bridget was invited to address the United Nations General Assembly about the implications of consciousness-based healing for global health policy. Standing before representatives from every nation on Earth, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a terminal cancer diagnosis to the forefront of a movement that was transforming how humanity understood health and healing. The ancient healing traditions that our ancestors preserved through centuries of persecution and suppression, Bridget told the assembled delegates, represent humanity's deepest wisdom about how to maintain health and restore wholeness when illness occurs. By learning to integrate this traditional knowledge with the best of modern medical science, we have the opportunity to create approaches to healing that could address not just individual illness, but the broader challenges facing our global community. She went on to describe pilot programs that were using traditional healing principles to address environmental degradation, social conflict, and economic inequality. "Healing isn't just about treating disease," Bridget explained. "It's about restoring balance and harmony at every level of human experience, from individual cells to global ecosystems." The response to her UN address was overwhelming. Governments began requesting consultation on how traditional healing principles might inform public health policy. The World Bank wanted to understand how community healing approaches might enhance the effectiveness of international development programs. Even military organizations began exploring how consciousness-based healing methods might help address trauma and build resilience among service members. But for Bridget, the most meaningful responses came from individuals around the world who were rediscovering their own healing heritage and learning to apply traditional wisdom to contemporary challenges. Letters arrived daily from people who had read about the Celtic healing program and had begun exploring their own family traditions, discovering healing knowledge that had been passed down through generations but had been dismissed as superstition until now. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a physician in Mexico City, wrote to describe how she had learned that her grandmother had been a traditional curandera, whose healing methods were proving remarkably effective when integrated with modern medical treatments. Dr. Kwame Sant, a psychiatrist in Ghana, reported that his grandfather's traditional healing ceremonies were helping patients with mental illness in ways that conventional therapy alone had never achieved. Dr. Sarah Running Bear, working on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, documented how traditional Native American healing practices were transforming addiction treatment outcomes. What we're witnessing, Bridget told a gathering of medical school deans from around the world, is nothing less than a global renaissance of healing wisdom. Traditional knowledge that was nearly lost is being revived and integrated with modern medicine in ways that are revolutionizing our understanding of what healing means and how it works. The transformation extended beyond medicine into every aspect of society. Educational institutions were incorporating traditional knowledge systems that understood learning as a holistic process involving mind, body, and spirit rather than just intellectual information transfer. Agricultural programs were reviving indigenous farming methods that worked with natural ecosystems rather than against them. Urban planners were studying traditional community designs that promoted social cohesion and mental health. As Bridget entered her 70s, she found herself serving not just as a healer and researcher, but as an elder stateswoman for a movement that was fundamentally changing how human beings understood their relationship to health, community, and the natural world. The cancer that had once seemed like her greatest enemy had become the catalyst for discoveries that were benefiting millions of people around the globe. Standing in her garden behind her home in Austin, where she grew many of the same medicinal plants that Padraig had taught her to work with in Ireland, Bridget reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed her from a conventional oncologist into a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern healing. The evening air carried the scent of healing herbs and the sound of students from the nearby M.D. Anderson Celtic Healing Center practicing traditional Irish songs that were an integral part of the healing protocols. Aisling, now 23 and completing a dual degree in medicine and traditional healing studies, joined Bridget in the garden as she often did in the evenings. The young woman had become not just a gifted healer, but a visionary leader who was helping to establish healing centers in countries around the world. "Grandmother Bridget," Aisling said, using the traditional Irish term of respect that had become natural between them over the years. "I've been having new dreams lately. The ancestors are showing me something that goes beyond what we've accomplished so far." "Tell me about these dreams," Bridget said, settling onto a bench beside a fountain where water flowed over stones carved with Celtic healing symbols. "I see a time when healing won't be something that happens only when people are sick," Aisling explained. "I see communities where everyone learns healing skills from childhood, where maintaining health and harmony is as natural as learning to read or write. I see schools where children learn to sense energy and work with consciousness as easily as they learn mathematics. I see families where healing knowledge is passed from grandparents to grandchildren as a normal part of growing up." Bridget nodded thoughtfully. "And what role do we play in creating this future?" "We're the bridge generation," Aisling said with certainty. "We're the ones who remember how to integrate the old knowledge with the new world. Our job is to train the teachers who will train the healers who will make this vision normal for future generations." As stars appeared in the Texas sky, Bridget felt a deep sense of completion and anticipation. The work that had begun with her grandmother Siobhan's protection of ancient knowledge had grown into a global movement that was transforming not just medicine, but humanity's entire approach to health, healing, and community. The cancer that had brought her to Ireland in desperation had become the doorway to discovering her true purpose as a healer, teacher, and guardian of wisdom that the world desperately needed. At 76, Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan McDermott was living proof that life's greatest challenges could become gateways to its greatest gifts. The healing that had begun with her own crisis had rippled outward to touch countless lives around the world, and the work was just beginning. The ancient Celtic prophecy that spoke of a time when the scattered children of healing lineages would return to restore balance to the world was no longer a distant hope. It was the reality being created by people like Aisling, who carried both traditional wisdom and modern knowledge into a future where healing would be the birthright of every human being. But the most challenging test of Bridget's work was yet to come. Dr. Victoria Hammond, a powerful oncologist who controlled cancer treatment protocols at several major medical centers, had been quietly building a coalition to challenge the integration of traditional healing methods into mainstream medicine. Hammond had financial ties to pharmaceutical companies that stood to lose billions if consciousness-based healing reduced dependence on expensive drug treatments. The attack came in the form of a coordinated media campaign that questioned the safety and efficacy of Celtic healing methods. Hammond appeared on medical talk shows and news programs, warning that desperate cancer patients were being misled by unproven treatments that could delay life-saving conventional therapy. Dr. McDermott may have experienced a fortunate outcome, Hammond declared during a CNN interview, but encouraging other cancer patients to pursue these mystical treatments instead of proven medical interventions is ethically irresponsible and potentially deadly. The accusations stung deeply because they threatened not just Bridget's reputation, but the welfare of patients who were benefiting from integrated healing approaches. Hammond's campaign also targeted the MD Anderson program specifically, claiming that the hospital was putting patients at risk by allowing traditional healers to work alongside medical staff. Dr. James McKenna called an emergency meeting with Bridget and the Celtic healing team to address the growing controversy. "We're facing unprecedented pressure from the medical board and several major donors," McKenna explained, his face creased with worry. "There are calls for a formal investigation into our integrative program, and some board members are questioning whether we should suspend Celtic healing services until these concerns are resolved." Bridget felt the weight of responsibility for hundreds of patients who depended on the integrated treatment approach. "Dr. McKenna, our clinical data shows clearly that patients who participate in Celtic healing alongside conventional treatment have significantly better outcomes than those who receive only standard care. We can't abandon these people because of political pressure." "I agree completely," McKenna replied, "but we need to respond to these attacks in a way that strengthens rather than weakens our position. What do you recommend?" The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Michael Chen, a biostatistician at Harvard who had been following Bridget's work, contacted her with a proposal that could definitively establish the scientific validity of Celtic healing methods. "Dr. McDermott," Chen explained during a video conference call, "I've been analyzing the data from your program and similar integrative healing centers around the world. What I'm seeing is compelling enough that I believe we could design a large-scale, randomized controlled trial that would meet the highest standards of medical research. If we can demonstrate the effectiveness of consciousness-based healing through rigorous scientific methodology, it will be impossible for critics to dismiss these approaches as unproven." The proposed study would involve over 2,000 cancer patients at 20 medical centers across 6 countries. Half would receive conventional treatment alone, while the other half would receive the same conventional treatments supplemented with traditional healing methods appropriate to their cultural background. The study would track not just survival rates and tumor response, but quality of life, psychological well-being, and healthcare costs over a 5-year period. Securing funding for such an ambitious study required building support from unexpected allies. The Gates Foundation expressed interest in the research because of potential applications for global health initiatives in developing countries. The European Union provided grants because several member nations wanted to integrate traditional healing methods into their national health systems. Even the U.S. National Institutes of Health contributed funding, recognizing that consciousness-based healing represented a promising area for medical research. While the large-scale study was being organized, Bridget faced a personal crisis that would test everything she had learned about healing and faith. Padraig MacCulloch, who had become both her closest collaborator and dearest friend, was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer during a routine medical examination. The irony was heartbreaking. Padraig, who had spent his life helping others heal from serious illnesses, was now facing his own mortality at age 64. Unlike Bridget's cancer, which had responded dramatically to Celtic healing methods, Padraig's condition seemed resistant to every treatment they tried. "Perhaps this is my time," Padraig said quietly as they sat together in his hospital room, watching the sunset through the window overlooking the Texas Medical Center. "I've lived a good life, and I've seen the ancient knowledge take root in the modern world. Maybe that was my purpose." Bridget felt tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare give up, Padraig MacCulloch. You taught me that healing is always possible when we align ourselves with the deepest currents of life. We're going to fight this with everything we know." The battle for Padraig's life became a mobilization of the entire global healing network that had grown around their work. Healers from Ireland, Japan, Brazil, Nigeria, and a dozen other countries contributed knowledge and energy to treating his condition. Aisling flew in from Dublin, bringing with her a team of young healers who represented the next generation of traditional medicine practitioners. For 3 months, they tried every combination of conventional and traditional treatments they could devise. Chemotherapy protocols were supplemented with consciousness-based healing techniques. Celtic herbal medicines were combined with cutting-edge immunotherapy drugs. Energy healing sessions were integrated with radiation treatments designed to target the tumor while minimizing damage to healthy tissue. The entire medical team involved in Padraig's care was amazed by how well he tolerated treatments that typically caused severe side effects. His energy levels remained stable, his immune system stayed strong, and his spirits were remarkably positive despite the seriousness of his condition. But the cancer proved to be unlike anything they had encountered. Rather than responding to treatment, it seemed to adapt and evolve, finding new ways to resist every therapeutic approach they attempted. After 4 months of intensive treatment, scans showed that the tumors were continuing to grow despite all their efforts. It was Padraig himself who finally called a halt to the aggressive treatments. "My friends," he said during a gathering of the healing team, "I've come to understand that my illness is teaching us something important. Not every battle can be won through force, even when that force includes both the best of modern medicine and the most powerful traditional healing methods." "What do you think it's teaching us?" Aisling asked, her young face serious but peaceful. "That sometimes healing means learning to die well rather than learning to live longer," Padraig replied. "And that the most important healing isn't what happens to our bodies, but what happens to our relationships with each other and with the sacred mystery that connects all life." In his final weeks, Padraig became a teacher of a different kind of healing, the healing that comes from accepting mortality while maintaining connection to the eternal dimensions of existence. The hospice where he spent his last days became a place of pilgrimage for people who had been touched by his work and wanted to learn from his approach to dying. "Death is not the opposite of healing," Padraig explained to a group of medical students who came to visit him. "Death is healing's completion, the final integration that allows our individual consciousness to merge back into the larger consciousness from which we emerged." When Padraig died peacefully on a spring morning with Bridget, Aisling, and dozens of friends and colleagues surrounding his bed, the grief was profound but not hopeless. His death became a teaching about how the healing work transcends individual lives, continuing through the people who carry forward the knowledge and love that healers share with the world. The memorial service for Padraig was held in the grove of oak trees behind Clonfert Abbey, where Bridget had first encountered the Celtic healing tradition 7 years earlier. Representatives from healing communities around the world gathered to honor a man who had helped preserve and revive ancient wisdom for the benefit of future generations. During the ceremony, something extraordinary happened that reminded everyone present why their work mattered so deeply. As stories were being shared about Padraig's life and contributions, a young woman approached the circle with her 6-year-old daughter. The woman explained that she had driven from Oklahoma after learning about the memorial, because Padraig's healing work had saved her daughter's life 3 years earlier when conventional medicine had offered no hope. "I wanted to tell you all," the woman said, tears streaming down her face, "that because of what Padraig taught us about healing, my daughter is alive and healthy today. And I wanted to promise that our family will carry forward the knowledge he shared with us for as long as we live." Similar testimonials continued throughout the day as people spoke about how Padraig's work had touched their lives. Cancer patients who had achieved remissions that conventional medicine couldn't explain. Families who had learned to support each other through healing crises using traditional methods. Healthcare workers who had integrated Celtic healing approaches into their practice and seen dramatic improvements in patient outcomes. By the end of the memorial service, it was clear that Padraig's death had not diminished the healing movement, but had instead catalyzed its expansion. People left the ceremony with renewed commitment to preserving and sharing traditional healing knowledge, understanding that this work was about something much larger than any individual healer or teacher. 6 months after Padraig's death, the results of the international clinical trial were published simultaneously in The Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. The findings were so compelling that they ended the debate about whether consciousness-based healing methods had legitimate medical applications. Patients who received conventional cancer treatment, supplemented with traditional healing methods, appropriate to their cultural background, showed a 43% improvement in 5-year survival rates compared to those who received conventional treatment alone. More remarkably, the integrated treatment group experienced 60% fewer serious side effects from chemotherapy and radiation, required 30% fewer hospitalizations, and reported dramatically higher quality of life scores throughout their treatment. The economic implications were equally significant. Despite the additional costs of providing traditional healing services, the integrated treatment approach reduced overall healthcare expenses by 28% due to fewer complications, shorter hospital stays, and reduced need for expensive supportive medications. Dr. Victoria Hammond, who had led the campaign against Celtic healing methods, was notably silent when the study results were published. But other critics of integrative medicine were forced to acknowledge that consciousness-based healing had demonstrated effectiveness according to the most rigorous scientific standards. The publication of the clinical trial results triggered a transformation in medical education and practice that exceeded Bridget's most optimistic expectations. Medical schools around the world began developing curricula that included training in traditional healing methods alongside conventional medical studies. The University of Pennsylvania established the first endowed chair in integrative healing. Harvard Medical School created a department of consciousness-based medicine. Johns Hopkins announced plans for a research institute dedicated to studying the mechanisms by which traditional healing methods influence biological processes. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of what researchers began calling spontaneous healing activation among healthcare workers who learned traditional healing methods. Nurses, doctors, therapists, and other medical professionals frequently discovered that exposure to consciousness-based healing techniques awakened dormant healing abilities that enhanced their effectiveness in caring for patients. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a nurse practitioner at Boston Children's Hospital, described her experience in a letter to Bridget. "After attending your workshop on Celtic healing methods, I began noticing that I could sense areas of illness or imbalance in my young patients before symptoms became clinically apparent. My diagnostic accuracy improved dramatically, and I seemed to be able to provide comfort and healing through touch in ways that went beyond anything I had learned in nursing school." Similar reports came from healthcare workers around the world who had learned traditional healing methods from their own cultural backgrounds. Japanese nurses discovered abilities to work with energy meridians that enhanced acupuncture treatments. Brazilian physicians found that incorporating indigenous healing ceremonies into their practice improved outcomes for patients with chronic diseases. African healthcare workers reported that traditional community healing rituals helped address mental health challenges more effectively than individual therapy alone. This phenomenon led to the establishment of healing ability assessment and training programs at major medical centers. Healthcare workers could be tested for natural healing aptitude and provided with appropriate training to develop these abilities in ways that complemented their conventional medical skills. The transformation extended beyond individual healthcare providers to entire medical institutions. Hospitals began incorporating healing gardens, meditation spaces, and ceremony rooms into their architectural designs. Sacred art from indigenous traditions was integrated into decor that supported rather than undermined the healing process. Music therapy programs expanded to include traditional healing songs and chants from cultures around the world. As Bridget entered her late 70s, she found herself serving as an elder stateswoman for a global movement that had fundamentally changed how humanity approached health and healing. The Catholic Healing Program at MD Anderson had become a model replicated at over 50 medical centers across 6 continents. The training protocols she had developed were being used to prepare a new generation of healers who could work skillfully with both ancient wisdom and modern medical technology. But the work that brought her the greatest satisfaction was mentoring young healers like Aisling, who represented the future of integrative medicine. Aisling had completed her medical training and established herself as one of the most gifted healers of her generation, capable of working with complex cases that challenged both conventional and traditional approaches to healing. "Grandmother Bridget," Aisling said during one of their regular consultations about challenging cases, "I've been having dreams about the next phase of our work. The ancestors are showing me visions of healing that go beyond treating individual illness to healing the collective trauma that affects entire communities and cultures." "Tell me more about these visions," Bridget encouraged. "I see healing centers established in places where historical trauma occurred, sites of genocides, battlefields, locations where indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. I see traditional healers working with historians, archaeologists, and community leaders to address wounds that have been carried through generations of families and cultures." Aisling's visions led to the development of what became known as historical trauma healing, applications of traditional healing methods to address psychological and social wounds that affected entire populations. The first pilot program was established at a former boarding school site where Native American children had been forcibly separated from their families and cultures for over a century. Working with tribal elders, mental health professionals, and community leaders, the healing team developed ceremonies and therapeutic approaches that addressed not just individual symptoms of historical trauma, but the collective grief and displacement that had affected generations of Native families. The results were remarkable. Communities that participated in historical trauma healing programs showed significant improvements in rates of suicide, addiction, and family dysfunction that had plagued them for decades. Similar programs were developed to address historical trauma in other populations: Holocaust survivors and their descendants, African American communities affected by slavery and systemic racism, refugee populations displaced by war and persecution. Each program was carefully adapted to the specific cultural and historical context, while drawing on universal principles of how consciousness-based healing could address collective as well as individual wounds. The success of historical trauma healing programs attracted attention from governments, international organizations, and academic institutions around the world. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa invited Bridget and Aisling to consult on how traditional healing methods might be integrated into post-conflict reconciliation processes. The European Union provided funding for programs addressing historical trauma in regions affected by ethnic conflicts. The United Nations established a working group on traditional healing approaches to collective trauma recovery. As Bridget's 80th birthday approached, She reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with her cancer diagnosis 13 years earlier. What had started as a desperate search for personal healing had grown into a global movement that was transforming not just medicine, but humanity's understanding of how individual, community, and planetary healing were interconnected. The Celtic Healing Center in Austin had become a pilgrimage destination for people from around the world, seeking both healing and training in traditional wisdom. Students came from every continent to learn how to integrate ancient knowledge with contemporary challenges, returning to their home countries to establish similar programs adapted to their own cultural contexts. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the emergence of what Aisling called the children of the awakening. Young people born into families that practiced traditional healing, who seemed to possess natural abilities that exceeded anything previous generations had experienced. These children could often diagnose illness through intuitive perception, communicate with plants and animals in ways that enhanced healing work, and demonstrate awareness of consciousness dimensions that expanded conventional understanding of human potential. These children represent the future we've been working toward, Aisling explained to Bridget as they watched a group of young people practicing healing techniques in the center's garden. They're growing up in a world where consciousness-based healing is normal, where working with energy and intention is as natural as reading or writing. They'll be able to take this work to levels we can't even imagine. On her 80th birthday, Bridget was invited to address the World Health Assembly about the implications of consciousness-based healing for global health in the 21st century. Standing before health ministers and medical leaders from every nation on Earth, she reflected on how far the healing movement had come and how much further it could go. 13 years ago, Bridget began her address, I was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer and given 6 months to live. In my desperation, I turned to the traditional healing knowledge that my Irish grandmother had preserved through stories I had dismissed as folklore. That decision to explore my ancestral heritage not only saved my life, it opened doorways to understanding healing in ways that have transformed medicine around the world. She went on to describe the global network of healing centers, the integration of traditional methods into medical education, the success of historical trauma healing programs, and the emergence of young healers whose abilities suggested extraordinary possibilities for the future of human health and wellness. But perhaps most importantly, Bridget concluded, this work has taught us that healing is not just about fixing what is broken. It's about remembering wholeness, restoring connection, and aligning ourselves with the fundamental creative intelligence that flows through all of life. When we learn to heal from this place of understanding, we create the possibility not just for healthier individuals, but for healthier communities and a healthier planet. The response to her address was a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes, but more meaningful to Bridget were the conversations that followed with health ministers who wanted to understand how traditional healing could be integrated into their national health systems. As Bridget entered her 80s, she gradually transitioned from active healing practice to serving as a teacher and mentor for the growing community of traditional healers around the world. The cancer that had once threatened her life had become completely undetectable, and her health remained remarkably robust despite her advanced age. The work continued to evolve and expand under the leadership of healers like Aisling and the many students who had trained at the Celtic Healing Center. New discoveries were being made regularly about how consciousness-based healing methods could be applied to challenges ranging from environmental restoration to conflict resolution to educational innovation. Standing in her garden on a warm evening in Austin, surrounded by the medicinal plants that had become her closest companions, Bridget felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The cancer that had seemed like her greatest enemy had become her greatest teacher, leading her to discover not just her Celtic heritage, but her true calling as a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. At 82, Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan McDermott was living proof that life's greatest challenges could become doorways to its most extraordinary gifts. The healing that had begun with her own crisis had rippled outward to touch millions of lives around the world, and the work was accelerating rather than slowing as new generations of healers carried the knowledge forward into an uncertain but promising future. The cancer that had once threatened to end her life had instead given her a life worth living, filled with purpose, connection, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that one's work is making a real difference in the world. At 82, Dr. Bridget O'Sullivan McDermott was exactly where she belonged, serving as an elder guardian of wisdom that was healing not just individuals, but the collective wounds of humanity itself.